what's up y'all? It's Dr. Paul with Liberty Hill Comics. The channel is where I share my passion and over 40 years of experience comic book collecting, investing, and conservation with you. This is episode 8 for this copy of America's Best Comics number 12 from January 1945, The Golden Age of Comic Books. Today we're going to review the results of mending this cover back together with Japanese tengujo paper and wheat paste and perform a few touch-ups. Thank you for joining me today. I appreciate all of the viewers sincerely, but especially those that take the time to like, subscribe, and comment on the channel. Let's get into it. By way of summary for this project, we're using my 9-step comic book conservation process. Not all comics require all 9 steps, and we determined this book only needed 6 of the 9 steps. We already performed the assessment, dry cleaning, and the wet cleaning and chemical stabilization, at least on the cover and first wrap. And then we did glue removal and began physical stabilization. Specifically, in episode 7, we mended the 2 halves of the cover and all of the loose bits of paper from the glue removal back into one cohesive sheet. Today in episode 8, we'll review the results and do a few touch-ups. We'll finish the rest of the steps in future episodes and we'll wrap up with a summary video when we're all done. As you can see, my cover looks great. It's mended solidly back into one cohesive piece of paper, and everything is well aligned with one exception we'll get to in a minute. The inks are still bright and the paper is supple. The tengujo paper repair is nearly invisible. There's just a slight milkiness where the repair is over thick black ink, but otherwise it's barely noticeable. This one small fragment that we aligned from the back blindly, when I did it, I mentioned that if it's misaligned, we'll just fix it from the obverse here. And it is off just a little bit, and we'll fix that today. I do also have 2 small flaps of paper that were folded and did not end up getting glued. One of them is right here. This was folded over here. And the other one is right here. This piece was folded over here when we did the mending. Both of those need to be glued down. I've given it some thought, and when I mended this page from the reverse, I did so to leave myself the option of only mending it from that side and leaving the obverse unobstructed. But after looking at it, how nearly invisible the repair is and how many small fragile flaps of paper we have, I'm leaning toward putting a thin strip of tengujo paper down the entire spine of this book from the outside as well. I think this will really help when we fold the cover over the inner flaps, and if we keep it on the black areas, I think it'll be nearly invisible. And we have a small spot on the cover here in this area where there's some sheen, and I'm not really sure what that is, but I'd like to cover it up. It may be just a little bit of the polyvinyl acetate glue residue that I haven't been able to remove. But I think if we have tengujo over it, it'll knock that sheen down and make the gloss of the cover more uniform, which I think would also just improve the look of the book. So for several reasons, I'm going to perform the task today. And I'm going to show you how, if you want to perform this work on a dry piece of paper rather than wetting the entire page, which I usually recommend, to do the work to minimize paper differentially expanding and causing warping that is difficult to remove during your press. So to prepare, I've already completed a few tasks. I've made up my normal aqueous solution, this time 1/4 saturated, 25% saturated calcium hydroxide. And I'm going to use that if I need it, just to wet this so that we can manipulate it and get that lined up perfectly with the rest of the cover art. I've also made up some wheat paste per the manufacturer's instructions. I've also already prepared a thin strip of tengujo that's going to go right over the areas I want. I've picked this very specifically because it's going to stay mostly off the colored areas. It is going to cover this area here, and it's going to double up over these open areas where we have some missing paper. Remember, we never cut the tengujo. I tore that from a large sheet by hand. I'm going to do a few more things to prep and we'll get started. All right, I put a piece of Polytex, which is just non-woven polyester fabric, underneath our work. And I went ahead and put some of that calcium hydroxide dilute solution here and have a syringe so that I can really control the delivery. The order of operations here is we're going to repair this first, then we'll glue down these two flaps, then we'll place the tengujo and glue it. Every time you have to do one of these, it's a little bit different, but I've actually had good experience just kind of pushing this around with my finger. So I'm going to wet it. You can see it's already saturating the paper. I'm going to see if I can't just shift it. Seems to be pretty well adhered. I'm going to give it another drop. I try to really keep it right on this piece. You see how well the water's wicking this whole area now. And as you saw, I delivered a very tiny amount, literally less than a drop. With the syringe. That's one of the really great things about the syringes. You can control so precisely how much you deliver. Okay, it looks like I can shift it a little bit now. So I'm just going to stabilize the paper and I'm just going to push that piece. I know you can't see it very well, but it can't be avoided because this is the only way I can do it with my finger. So I'm just going to push that piece into place and try to shift it. So I'm going to try to do like this. Kind of twisting it. And it is going, but it's not quite there yet. I don't really want to have to lift it completely off the paper. But maybe I'll have to. It doesn't quite want to line up just yet. So let's see what happens if I do try to slide a micro spatula under it. Doesn't really want to move that way. So, I mean, we're very close. I just want to shift it just a tiny bit more. All right, I think that's aligned as near perfectly as we can align 80-year-old paper that's already been torn. So I think I'm going to call that good. I'm going to turn our attention to these tiny little flaps. All right, so here's one of those flaps, and I'm just going to move it out of the way so that I can make sure I get glue underneath it. Again, we're using wheat paste today. As I explained last video, you can use methyl cellulose. Wheat paste is just slightly stronger, so I prefer it when I'm working on the spine. Okay, all we need is to just dab a little bit of material in there, and we're going to fold that flap back down. That's going to be happy living right there. The other one was right here. I believe this was it. Yeah. There's a little fold right there. Do the same thing. Just gonna get some glue underneath that. We're gonna lay that flap down. That's gonna be very happy right there. Okay, now we're gonna place our strip of tengujo. I think actually before I do that, there's one more spot right here where there's a tiny flap. I think I'm gonna be able to align. Ooh, and the brush did it perfectly in one stroke. Okay, so we're gonna place our tengujo. It's gonna go just like that. And I have, as you can see, my wheat paste is indeed a paste. It's not a gel, and it's not a liquid, it's a paste. I'm going to start in the center. I'm going to go all the way down the spine, and I'm going to use it pretty liberally. Okay, and then I'm going to go outward from the spine, although I don't quite want to get there yet. I want to get in this direction first, all the way up the center. There is a trick to getting this wheat paste just the way you want it. I sort of have said in the videos several times, I make it according to the manufacturer's instructions. It's actually a little bit more complicated than that, and I think I'll do a video in the future on how best to do this, because the manufacturer just tells you to mix it in a certain ratio with water. That's all well and good, and that is, in a nutshell, you know, in a simplified world, that is what I do. I just mix it in that ratio. However, in practice, what happens is, if you just take the ratio they recommend and microwave it, they recommend that you heat it, and you just microwave it, what you will find is that you get a very lumpy, gel that doesn't have a good consistency. It'll have chunks. It'll have chunks of gel and then watery areas, and it's not really consistent. There are some tips and tricks you can do to get yourself a much more consistent paste, and I think it actually warrants a whole video. So I think I'm going to make that. You can see this, even this is not perfect, but it's pretty nice consistent gel. And I do think, like I said, I think it warrants a whole video. So I think I'm going to do that in the future. Now, those of you that have been with me for a while and follow the channel know that I generally recommend mending like this with a page that's already wet. And I mentioned it briefly in our intro. The reason why I recommend that is because water is absorbed by paper in a very specific way, in which the water literally enters the paper fibers. And because of that, it gets absorbed and it will expand the paper fibers. As they expand, they push paper around them. And as they push that paper, if other paper doesn't get moved in a similar amount, it'll create some warping, some dimensional instability, and that warping can be quite difficult to remove in your pressing step. So that's why I don't generally tend to do it that way. I don't generally tend to mend this way. But I'm showing you that if you do, for some reason, feel you need to mend with dry paper, maybe you have some inks that really aren't water insoluble. That is, you have some inks that aren't water fast, as they say in the industry, and you're concerned about wetting the entire page, or you have other concerns about wetting the page, maybe just for stability or other reasons, then I think if you are going to do it, this is how you do it. You do it with a really nice gel, and you apply it in such a way that the gel is not so thick that you get a lot of undue warping. Notice here, my gel is being absorbed by the paper, kind of almost immediately, in a way that there's not enough water that I'm providing here to fully saturate the page. So this is done. I'm going to consider some very thin pieces for two other areas on this outside, the obverse of the cover. One is this area here. It is quite weak, and I think it'll benefit from some more tengujo. Initially I thought just there, but now that I'm looking at it, I think actually this whole bottom edge, and the other areas right here where we have that clear tear, but I think here, rather than this whole edge, I'm just going to do a small piece here. I could also consider, because there's a rip all the way through right here, doing here, or this edge from here to here, but I don't actually think it's necessary there. That's a small tear, and I think we have good coverage, and that's very visible. These are both on the back, so I'm more comfortable putting something on the back here. So I don't know if I quite have, I do, here we go. Here's a piece that's going to cover the top of that and also cover the whole edge. So I'm going to go ahead and rip this here and someplace out here. Place that like that. Yeah, that's going to be beautiful. I'm going to start in the middle. And work in each direction. I'm going to glue here because I want to bond the tengujo that's on the reverse with the tengujo that's on the obverse. That's the best way to do that. Get just a little bit more glue. I'm going to do the same in this area. Tengujo on the obverse, bonded with that on the reverse. want to make sure this page is down when I do this. I don't want that to be curled up and then basically be gluing it in a curled up position. Because again, that's the sort of warp that is quite difficult to remove during pressing. Okay. I think that's gonna be nice. And we have just a small strip here. Okay, just a thin triangle here, like that. Just to reinforce that area. And it just about disappears when you do it correctly. Okay, now I mentioned again that we're doing this dry, which I don't ordinarily recommend. One of the other reasons why I was comfortable doing it dry is because I knew I could do that work quickly. Now I'm going to very quickly get this into drying now to get this liquid out of it while doing it under pressure. So I'm going to do another layer of Hollytex, paper towel, and my granite weight. Switch the paper towel out. This will probably only require like 2 changes of paper towel switch, and then this will go into my cold press. And I think we'll wrap up this episode with that. I hope you've enjoyed this Golden Age comic book conservation video. Most of the materials I use today are available from Amazon in the affiliate links below if you need any of them for your own conservation projects. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know below and tune in next episode in this process. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And until next time, take care of one another.